US President Donald Trump says he plans to talk to Russian President Vladimir Putin about the war in Ukraine on Tuesday. He's been speaking to reporters on board the presidential plane Air Force One. Trump says there's what he's calling a very good chance to end the war in Ukraine. Pressure has been mounting on Putin to accept the US-backed proposal for a 30-day ceasefire, which has already been approved by Kyiv last week.
We learned a lot. We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. And we'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
What sort of concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants, because that's up. That's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
We're going to speak to Baig, who is in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. And as we heard there, Trump talking about the division of land and power plants. I mean, how is that going to go down there in Ukraine?
Well, we've heard nothing officially so far, but we have heard in the past President Zelenskyy say that there will be no end to the war unless Russia withdraws from all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. Now, some of that is very unrealistic, but he's also said in recent days that Ukraine will never accept any of the occupied territories occupied by Russian forces as part of the Russian Federation. Now, you ask me how that will go down. It will not go down well anywhere in Ukraine. People have been fighting in this war for now over 3 years. People have lost their lives. There's been a great deal of sacrifice from many Ukrainian people. And the idea of giving up land to Russia, including those power plants, will not go down well amongst the Ukrainian people. And if Ukraine is forced to do that, it will have a political impact on those in authority here for agreeing to those terms. But it's still early days, in the sense that Ukraine has not had direct talks with Russia. This is US President Donald Trump talking about it, and he's saying that it's very likely that he can get peace. But yet we still haven't had Ukrainian side sit down with the Russian side. We don't even know if that's going to actually happen, or whether it's just going to be Russia and the United States deciding this. But yes, it won't go down well here in Ukraine.
Yeah. Obviously the fighting is continuing. Overnight, Ukrainian drone strikes targeted energy facilities in Russia's Astrakhan region, and there were also more strikes in Donetsk. Can you just talk us through what's happened in the last 24 hours or so?
Yes, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has said that there's been drone and missile attacks across towns and cities here in Ukraine. In Donetsk, there was shelling. We understand one person was killed and one injured. But also there's continued fighting in the Kyiv region and Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is a town in the east that the Russians have been trying to capture. But also in the southern Donetsk region, Russia has been making slow but steady gains. Now, there's a region called Dnipropetrovsk, which until now has only been affected by missile and drone strikes. Now, Ukraine has started evacuating people from that region along that border of that region as Russian forces advance. Now, only 7 kilometers away from that region. Now, we know that there's fighting going on in Kursk and people have been evacuated in Sumy, but also we have to remind our viewers that there's continued missile drone strikes across Ukraine, towns and cities, but also in the east and southern Donetsk region, there are slow and steady gains that Russian forces are making.
OK, thank you so much, as always, Baig for us there in Kyiv. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Samuel Ramani, who is an Associate Fellow at Royal United Services Institute. He joins us from London. Thank you very much for being with us once again. First of all, what's your initial reaction to Trump not only saying that he's going to speak with Vladimir Putin on Tuesday, but that concessions on land and power plants are also going to be discussed?
Well, I mean, I think that was par for the course for Trump, but it's clearly something that the Ukrainians are informally lashing out. I saw a quote from a Ukrainian official this morning saying that there's going to be no possibility for additional territory to be ceded to Russia. Russia is claiming not just the territory that it occupies militarily right now, but also the entirety of regions which it partially occupies, like all of Zaporizhia region, all of Kherson region. If Trump comes on with a peace proposal that hands the entirety of those regions to Russia, the Ukrainians will balk, and maybe the whole Ukrainian agreement to the ceasefire might also unravel.
Trump also claimed that there's a very good chance that he's going to end the war, implying that it was going to be sooner rather than later. Do you see any reality in that?
Well, I mean, it's classic for Trump to talk big about this type of thing, but the reality is Russia is on the ascendancy right now. The Russians are on the verge of kicking the Ukrainians out of Kursk and have been trying in recent days to penetrate the front line in Sumy to cross the border. They're making incremental gains, as your presenter said, in Donetsk. And the Ukrainians have a lot of uncertainty about where they're going to be able to get the scale of their artillery shells, air defense missiles. They're out of ATACMS, for example. They're having to replace them now with GLS-DLBs, which are less effective but can still do the job. So the Russians are clearly ascendant, and it's hard to imagine them conceding and stopping the war and derailing this momentum without strong guarantees that might be unacceptable to both the Europeans and the Ukrainians.
Yeah, just on that point, I mean, Kyiv's already approved this 30-day ceasefire. Vladimir Putin has yet to. I mean, is there any pressure at all for Putin to do it right now when they are making such gains on the front line?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously domestically, Putin is facing a lot of pressure not to go ahead with that. When you're looking at some of the nationalist commentators like Alexander Dugin or Igor Korchenko, they're providing a lot of memories of Minsk II, right, back in 2015, where they say that the Russians, to appease the West and to appease the Europeans, stopped the war prematurely. That allowed Ukraine to rearm, that allowed the NATO threat to continue, and then necessitated a much larger war in 2022. So I think that Putin is getting a lot of pressure from some of his nationalist allies to continue the war. Equally, Russian public opinion seems to show that a majority of Russians would be open to a peace settlement. So he's got to consider those two things. And internationally, I think he is getting some pressure for the ceasefire. I think that China also is welcoming these developments towards peace and is probably informally providing Russia with some hints that they want a ceasefire to be at least entertained.
OK. What have you made of the moves by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as other European leaders, to boost their support for Ukraine, the coalition of the willing? Is that all talk, or do you believe that they are willing to actually follow through?
Well, I mean, the key thing is how much they can actually follow through, right? Because when you look last year, in September 2023, North Korea started supplying artillery shells to Russia on a large scale. They hit 1 million by the early part of 2024, and they moved up most likely to 2 to 3 million by the middle of the year. The Czech initiative, which supplied artillery shells, which aimed to supply 1 million shells, took the better part of a year to come to fruition. So the North Koreans were actually able to supply the Russians with more critical assistance than the Europeans as a bloc were able to give to Ukraine. So there needs to be a real substantive increase in their ability to supply not only artillery shells and ammunition, but also air defense missiles and more long-range missiles, so more Scalps and Storm Shadows to replace ATACMS, for this to be taken seriously. And the second thing is Keir Starmer's initiative is running against what Trump and Putin might be discussing in a ceasefire. He's been very clear that the Russians are opposed to any kind of European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, whether it be under the NATO label, EU label, Coalition of the Willing label, any label. So the Europeans are pursuing a track that's different from what the Americans are, and that could complicate Russia's acquiescence to the ceasefire. So there's a lot of moving parts here. It's an interesting initiative, but there needs to be more substance, and I hope we can see that over the coming week.
Thanks so much, Samuel. As always, great to get your thoughts. Samuel Ramani there for us out of London.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.